All right, great. Let's get started, folks. So, hello. Like I put in the chat, I'll just say it again while we're waiting. Everyone, please go ahead and type your name and where you're joining us from into the chat. That way we've got a great idea of where we're going. Keep an eye on the chat. If you'd like to utilize closed captioning, we do have that available. There's a link that Kim will keep dropping into the chat, so you'll be able to see where to get from that. Let's see here. So, hi, I'm Molly McFawn. I'm the 4-H educator for Orange and Washington counties. And I'm here with Kimberly Griffin, who's the 4-H educator for Bennington and Rutland counties. And as we're gathering, I just want to go over the social code that we'll all be obeying today so that we can be able to get through this with as many folks as we have on. All right, so one of the first things that's important is that guests will be muted unless they're talking, because we're going to want to be able to listen to Aimee today. We want to share thoughts and ask questions via the chat, so please stay on topic while you're in the chat. Please be courteous and respectful. Make sure, if you can, not to create any background distractions, trying not to have things going in your background. If things are going to happen in your background, feel free to just take your picture down, but we'd love your picture up for while we can. And when possible, please do keep your video on. We'd love you all to stay engaged and participate fully. So you're all here to learn about informational interviewing today, so please do ask questions. This isn't like a job interview where you're the focus of the interview. It's the opposite. This is an opportunity for you to speak with and question a professional in a field that you're interested in to see if that would be a good fit for you. Now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, I would love to introduce today's guest. So today we have Detective Sergeant Aimee Nolan, who will be going over information with us about her career. Hi, Aimee. How are you doing today?
Hey everyone, I'm doing well. It's pretty exciting to watch everyone popping into the chat from all over the state. It's kind of a fun, despite the challenges of not being able to do a lot of this stuff in person. This kind of opens us up in a different way. I wouldn't have access to students across the state all at once otherwise. So I'm super excited about the chance to be here today. So Molly, when you're all set, if you can stop sharing so I have just a quick PowerPoint, and then I really do want to open this up primarily to questions. So yeah, today I'm going to be presenting sort of law enforcement in general, but also specifically crime scene investigations. That's my specialty. So a little bit about myself. I'm the assistant commander of the crime scene search team for the Vermont State Police. I recently obtained my Master of Forensic Sciences. I have been a police officer for over 24 years. And prior to the position that I'm in right now, I was a detective, both a detective trooper and then promoted to detective sergeant. And in that position, I worked a lot of complex investigations. Basically, the stuff that the uniform troopers just don't have time to follow up on, right? So they're responding to things happening in progress. And then when the dust settles and it's time for the investigation, oftentimes they turn those over to detectives within the Bureau of Criminal Investigations. So when I was a detective trooper, I, for about 6 years, specialized in crimes against children and sexual assault investigations. Some of you may or may not have heard of a special investigations unit. Those are special units throughout the state that are pretty much county-based, where law enforcement, DCF, social worker, investigators, and doctors, and sort of a whole team of folks work together on those types of cases. Death investigations is a big part of that, and then just other bigger cases where there's a lot of moving parts, such as robberies, embezzlements, things like that. So for comedic value, this is how I think I look, right, like the Hollywood stars, but this is how I actually look. Tyvek suits are the white suits that you see me wearing in these photos. Not glamorous, very, very hot, especially in the summer. I feel like some days my job should be featured on the show Dirty Jobs, because it's usually not conducted in the most clean places or the most sterile places. So a lot of times we will don PPE or personal protective equipment that includes masks, gloves, the suits, boots. There's a lot of different layers. So Just a little comedic value there. So what exactly do I do as the assistant commander of crime scene search team? I work on major crime investigations. We will come out and process crime scenes involved in homicides, officer-involved shootings, and any other suspicious deaths. So a lot of times before something can be ruled a homicide or not, it's suspicious enough that they want to have the crime scene team process it in case the investigation shows that it was at the hands of another person or a homicide. Our team is called to process scenes not only for the Vermont State Police, but essentially the entire state of Vermont. Any state police agency, federal, county level, any of them can request our services. Some of our larger police departments in Vermont will have a detective bureau that can handle the investigation side of it, but they need help with the crime scene. Other departments that maybe are only a 2 or 3 person department will oftentimes just call in the state police and ask that the state police take over the investigation. So our major crime unit will do the investigation side and we'll do the crime scene. There's a lot of other duties that go along with the team. For example, I'm in charge of the gun storage for firearms after they leave barracks level. I'm also in charge of the drug storage room. So after drugs are processed at the forensic lab, they come to an evidence room that I'm in charge of, you know, and keeping that inventory and that chain of custody for that. So there's a lot of other jobs. I also teach at the police academy twice a year to the full-time police recruits, and then 3 or 4 times a year to folks that are trying to get their part-time certification. So there's a lot of different things that I do. But I'm just going to show you a couple quick pictures. For some of you, this may be really cool. For some of you, it may be, you know, kind of a little gory, but just a glimpse of what we do. I don't feel like anything I'm going to show is probably any worse than what Hollywood portrays, and they are getting pretty good at making things realistic. So the picture that just popped up where I'm laying on the ground, we are doing a burial dig, basically, for human remains that were buried outside. This is a door where someone inside the residence shot through the door to the outside. So we're doing a lot of what's called trajectory work here, trying to follow the path of the projectiles after they leave the firearm. And there is what we often see on our death investigations as far as the blood and the gore. So how did I get here to where I am today? I am a Spaulding graduate. I graduated in 1991. Right after high school, I went to Trinity College of Vermont, which is no longer there. It's got absorbed into the UVM campus, but it's right there in Burlington, right near UVM Medical Center. I graduated there in 1995. I changed my major my sophomore year. So I started out thinking I wanted to be a business teacher. I really liked the idea of teaching. I had a mentor when I was in the VOTEC program in the business field and just thought the world of him and thought that I wanted to do that for my career. So I started out having to be a triple major of education, business to be able to teach it. And then the state of Vermont at the time didn't recognize business as something that could go along with your education degree. So I chose psychology because I had taken that as an introductory course in high school and really liked it. In the meantime, in my sophomore year, I started getting deeper and deeper into the business courses, and it was no longer what I wanted to have anything to do with, the corporate accounting and things like that. Not anything I was interested in. So on a wing and a prayer, I switched majors. I kept the psychology, and I switched to sociology criminal justice, which was a combined major at Trinity, because I had taken a sociology course and really fell in love with the whole idea of sociology. And then at that point, I had a 1.5 years vested in the business courses. So I took, I think if I remember correctly, it was 1 more to minor or 2 more courses to actually get my associate's degree. So I pushed through and graduated with a double major and my associates in business. So just sort of making myself more well-rounded. That's a really good piece of advice that I give to students who think they want to get into law enforcement. Don't go to school for a law enforcement degree. The reason that I say that is you're going to learn everything that you need to be a police officer at the police academy and during your field training time. So make yourself more well-rounded, because what if your first day on the job, something terrible happens and you get scared out of your mind and you don't want to do it anymore, or you get hurt, or it's just a catastrophe and you don't like it. What else are you going to do if you literally went to school for a law enforcement degree? We, being law enforcement today, would rather see folks with other degrees behind them, right? Because we are sort of a melting pot of backgrounds in law enforcement. So whether it's a business degree, whether it's criminal justice, which is better than straight up law enforcement degree, sociology, psychology, social work, you know, anything but basically law enforcement, because that way you're bringing something to the table that maybe one of your coworkers can't or doesn't have. So I got off my subject here, but my senior year of college, I started a part-time dispatching job at the Winooski Police Department. And then the summer after graduation, I worked for the South Burlington Police Department. For those of you that are Spaulding students and around the Barrie area, you probably know what the bumblebees are. They're part-time civilian bike path patrol officers or bicycle officers that are kind of an extra set of eyes out there for the police department. So I did that. I carried OC spray for my protection and a police radio and rode a bike all summer. It was great. That fall, I was hired part-time by Montpelier Police Department. I went through the part-time academy, did some field training hours in the fall of 95. And before I could finish my FTO, I was offered a full-time job in January of 96. And I went to the police academy for, at that point, it was about 3.5 months. I worked at Montpelier until 2002. I switched and worked for Barrie City PD for a few years. And then I transferred to the Vermont State Police, going through their hiring process it was basically like, I think I started in the summer/fall of 2004 and was hired in 2005. And I am set to retire in just under 4 years, which I'm getting both really excited about, but really nervous about at the same time. I've done this for, 24, it'll be almost 30 years by the time I retire. So doing something else is a little scary. So I just want to talk quickly kind of about what I did within the Vermont State Police, because at Montpelier and at Barrie City, I was a uniformed police officer responding to calls. The great thing about the state police is just it's a bigger agency, so there's a lot more opportunities to do different things. So I was a uniformed trooper from 2005 to about the fall of 2007, so about 2.5 years. During that time, I got on to one of our special teams called Search and Rescue, which I really enjoyed. I loved being outside, outdoors, hiking, things like that. I also was on the crime scene search team starting in 2007. The state police had gone away for a few years from having the team made up of sworn law enforcement, and that means certified law enforcement officers. And they had civilians from the Vermont Forensic Lab that were going out and responding to calls, processing crime scenes. And then the decision was made to bring it back to the sworn personnel, basically to keep that process a little cleaner. It's not best practice in some people's view to have the same people that are collecting the evidence and processing the crime scene be the ones that process it in a lab. So really to kind of keep that process cleaner, sworn personnel took the team back in 2007, and I've been on the team since that point. But the way that it was before, it was a special team assignment. So my regular job was either being a uniformed trooper or being a detective, and then when the need arose for a crime scene to be processed, I would get activated. So that's what our special team assignments are kind of all about. I became a detective trooper in the fall of 2007, and I was able to move up pretty quickly, based in part on the almost 10 years of experience I came on to the state police with. I did that for about 6 years. I was promoted into the polygraph unit in the fall of 2013, went away for 10 weeks to polygraph school. I did it for about 1.5 years, and it really just was not the right fit for me. Very difficult decision for me to make because I've never quit anything in my life. So kind of waving the white flag and saying this is just not the right fit for me and I'm really not happy doing this was a really difficult decision, but luckily the department supported me. And I was able to, at that point, I had already gotten the promotion to sergeant. So I stayed a sergeant and came back to a barracks level, again, doing those death investigations, embezzlements, robberies, things like that. And then in February of 2018, I was transferred into the assistant commander position. So I think this form is going to be, or this handout's going to be available to you guys at the end, but this is something that the folks at UVM Extension came up with as sort of the pathway, if you will, of getting where I got. And essentially, I'm kind of outlining the same things that I just did in my presentation. You know, find out as much as you can about the field if you're interested in it. You know, during your high school and college years, strive to be well-rounded, like I talked about. Study different things, learn what you really like. Be very mindful at a young age, please, of your social media presence, because that's going to be looked at down the road, right? So we've all heard about horror stories of someone we know sending a picture maybe on Snapchat to someone that they trusted, and next thing you know, it's gone around the entire school. Those are, you know, examples of things that can definitely happen, and you might as well plan on happening. But also know that even your TikTok videos or your Facebook posts or whatever other social media is out there, that's all out there, right? Once it's there, sure, you can take a post down, but you don't know that someone else hasn't somehow saved that post. And you wouldn't want that to come out down the road and affect your ability to get into a field that you really want to get into. Obviously, law enforcement is probably more strict than other professions about looking into someone's past, right? We do a very thorough background investigation on folks before they're hired. So we talked about what I did in college, and then what I did my senior year and right after college, and then at the police academy. We kind of threw in a blurb there under the police academy. So for those of you, this may come up as a question later. If some of you are interested in the crime scene investigation or the forensic science end of the field, what I always tell folks is it really depends on where you want to end up, okay? What I mean by that is if you want to stay in the New England area, for the most part, in New England, and even many, many other states across the US, but primarily in New England, except for maybe our really large departments like Boston or New York City, even though that's not technically New England. Most of the crime scene investigators, if not all, are sworn law enforcement like myself, okay? There are some departments, larger departments, that do have civilian people that do their crime scene processing. So down south, there's a lot of civilians. So if you think you want to end up in Florida, you can go to school for forensic science and graduate and maybe get a job as a crime scene investigator as a civilian and not have to be a police officer. So we just sort of threw that into the slideshow because I wanted to make sure that was a talking point, you know, kind of depending on what you want to do. And then even within the forensic science field itself, there's a couple of different paths that you can take, right? Do you want to be in the field, being basically a CSI, or do you want to work in a lab somewhere? Both of those are crucially important to the process. So it really depends on what you want to do and where you want to go. In Vermont, we have one forensic laboratory, so it's very competitive getting hired. So again, think about where you want to be later in life. You know, a lot of people say, I'm getting out of Vermont, and they end up staying here. It really depends. But just that's something definitely to think about. So advice that I can offer, start thinking about the field now and really what interests you. Do I want to be a law enforcement officer and sort of do the crime scene thing on the side? Do I want to work in a lab somewhere? Do I want to work in the mental health side, but with law enforcement? That's really an up and coming thing for us as well, is how we can better work with folks suffering from a mental health crisis. And we're getting a lot of embedded social workers right into our departments and our barracks now. Know that you can change your mind, right? I'm a classic example of that. I was not someone who grew up knowing I always wanted to be a police officer. I had no one in my family that had ever done it. So it was a little different for me. And even when I switched to sociology, criminal justice at that point of my sophomore year of college, I still didn't know I wanted to be a law enforcement officer. So know that you can change your mind, and that's okay. Again, be aware of your presence. Start thinking about that sort of thing now if you do want a career in law enforcement, right? Not just your social media, but who are you hanging out with? What types of influences are in your life? Are you hanging out with a lot of people who like to party and they're underage drinking and doing a lot of the things that go along with that? Think about that now, especially in college when you're getting closer to maybe applying for a job in the field. We expect people, like I write here, toe the line, right? We expect people who think that they want to have a career in law enforcement or somewhere in the field of criminal justice to be living that lifestyle already. We've had, as a polygraph examiner especially, I did pre-employment backgrounds, and we saw lots of folks come in for their polygraph examination, and we would get statements from people that they were just at an underage drinking party last week, or they just smoked marijuana, 3 weeks ago. That's not going to fly. Marijuana is now legal, so it's a little less strict there, but there's just a lot of things to think about. And if you really want to get into this field, they're all things that you should be thinking about now and sort of getting accustomed to that lifestyle. Think about both your physical well-being, right? If you want to be in this field physically, it can be a lot of pressure and a lot of work. So if you think you want to get into law enforcement, start getting used to a physical regime, building that into your lifestyle. Start thinking about your mental well-being. What are things that I enjoy, and how do I turn my mind off, or what are my stress relievers, things like that. And again, to broaden your knowledge base as much as possible. Be a sponge and kind of soak everything in, and that will help you figure out maybe which exact path you want to be on in the field. So that is all that I have for my presentations.
I'm going to just start with one so we can get rolling on this, but again, feel free to type them into the chat. What does a normal workday look for you?
Okay, so for me, well, right now, especially with COVID, it's very strange. I'm sitting in my family room. We've been at a level 3 response with the state police. So those of us who are non-essential and not out on the road in uniform every day responding to calls have been tasked with working from home, doing reports and things like that. It really day to day, it depends. Sometimes we have, we're very busy with crime scenes. Surprisingly, through the COVID pandemic, things have really slowed down, which I sort of honestly thought might be the opposite. Everyone's stuck at home. Stress levels are extremely high. I thought that we might be seeing a lot more crime than normal, but we haven't. So a lot of times it's the not so glorious side of the job, a lot of paperwork, report writing. If I run a crime scene and I write a report, it's probably anywhere between 30 and 50 pages long. So it takes sometimes up to a week to complete a crime scene report.
When you're out in the field, what are like the things you have to be cautious of?
Great question. So biological hazards are a big one on a crime scene, right? So we have to be very careful to protect ourselves from any bodily fluid on a scene. Most times it's blood in what we're dealing with. So personal protective equipment is very high for us. Anytime we're processing a crime scene, we're coming in hours after the crime has occurred. So we have to have scene security present that is watching our back, essentially. A lot of times we will work a crime scene with those Tyvek suits on. We're going to take our weapons off because it's really just clunky under the Tyvek suit. So I'm a police officer. Not having my gun on me when I'm in uniform working is a little bit of a nerve-wracking thing. So I need to know that scene security is there, but I also have to have my head on a swivel like normal to be making sure that someone isn't trying to come into my crime scene to contaminate it, destroy evidence, remove evidence. That's another thing we have to be really careful of is as we're processing, we need to be very cognizant of our actions so that we aren't, moving, destroying, contaminating evidence. Animals, we need to be cautious of animals. If there's an animal in the house that's not friendly, a lot of times we'll do what we can to have animals removed from a scene if possible. If a family member or a neighbor is willing to take them, we'll do that. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to it. But good question.
Excellent. I've got some questions in the chat here.
Great.
If I were to want a career in forensics to work in a lab, would it be better for me to move to an area with a higher crime rate, like a big city?
Well, like I said, it's very competitive in Vermont because we only have one crime lab, right? So you'd have to be willing to move somewhere, or you wouldn't have to be, but you would have a better chance if you move to somewhere where there is a higher population. Okay, not necessarily crime rate, because it's all relative to how many people are in the area. But if you're moving to a large area where there's a much bigger population, then they're probably going to have a much bigger and busier forensic lab to work at. So yeah, I would say you'd want to think about probably getting out of New England if that's something that is, on the table for you. I hate to say that because I love New England, but it's kind of the reality of it too.
Excellent. I've got another question in the chat. Besides sort of what you described, generally doing something different than just law enforcement for college, there was, oh, sorry, it just scooted through. What sort of science courses or degrees do you recommend when students do get to college? Do you have any particular recommendations?
I would say for sciences, I mean, we have, in teaching at the academy, I have access to all of our newest troopers. And one of the things is I always find out from them what their background is. We have people that have electrical lighting and design degrees, right? They wanted to work in a theater somewhere. We have troopers who have criminal justice degrees, business degrees, marketing. We have a lot of military background. We have all kinds of stuff. We have biologists. We have a bona fide rocket scientist on the state police. He literally is was a rocket scientist. So, I mean, I would say anything you can get your hands on, especially if you want to get into any type of crime scene investigation. Any of the forensics classes you can get your hands on. I teach a couple of different crime scene investigation courses, so colleges are coming around more to that idea now. But any of the, anatomy or biology, even really anything that interests you.
Excellent. Here's another one. What are some of the day-to-day differences between uniformed officers and detectives? As in, what are each doing on an average day? What would be the differences?
Okay. That's a great question. So a uniformed, whether this is a police officer or a trooper, it doesn't really matter. When I was in uniform, I woke up in the morning, I put on the uniform, and I signed on for duty, and off I went in my cruiser. A lot of it is driving around, right? It's probably 90% straight up boredom and 10% adrenaline rush. I would say, typically you are responding to anything from barking dog complaints, noise complaints, doing traffic work, to crimes in progress, maybe domestic assaults that are happening, family fights, drunk and disorderly. The real difference, the best way that I can describe it is a uniformed police officer is reacting. They're reacting to something happening at that time. Whereas with a detective, we're still reactive, but we're reacting after the fact. So, for example, when I was working in the sex crimes unit, I wasn't responding to perhaps a sexual assault that had just occurred. Typically, that would be referred to me, and I would be dealing with that in the day or days following. With a robbery, those are the few things that, the uniformed troopers go immediately. They secure a scene. The detectives go. I can think of a couple bank robberies right off the top of my head where, as soon as the perpetrator typically leaves the bank, the uniformed troopers arrive, and then the detectives are right there. We're locking down the bank. We're getting statements from everyone. But detectives are doing a lot more of the investigation side of it, right? So really delving into the case facts, whatever evidence is there that they're going to need to try to prove this crime occurred. So whether that's a lot of interviews with witnesses, perpetrators, victims, as well as, really doing search warrants into maybe searching for someone's home for evidence, or doing a search warrant to search their cell phone. Everyone lives with their cell phone, and there's a lot, every crime involves a cell phone. So there's a lot that can be done with the search warrants into someone's cell phone, and not just the cell phone, but perhaps the carrier. So Verizon or AT&T, we want your phone records. We're going to get those from the carrier. We want a warrant. We can serve a search warrant on Facebook and get all of your Facebook content. So just a lot more of the investigation side of things with detectives than uniformed troopers are more responding or reacting to something happening at the time.
Excellent. Here's another one from the chat. What is the most dangerous call you've ever been on? Do you know if you can quantify that?
Let's see. I would say what stands out to me as one of my more dangerous days was actually a crime scene investigation. We had a homicide in St. Johnsbury, and what happened was it was a husband and wife. They were separated. The husband convinced the wife to meet with him despite a restraining order being in place against her better judgment. She did. A physical altercation happened and he murdered her. And following the injury to her, he brought his, I think it was a shotgun. Yeah, it was a shotgun. He brought that up into the woods, shot himself in the stomach, thinking it would probably be a fatal injury. But he just sat there for a while in pain, hurting. But he was right up in the woods behind the parking lot where the incident took place, with a shotgun, which will travel a significant difference, watching all of us process the crime scene as this is unfolding, and everyone, you know, it was very chaotic in the beginning. So that was a pretty eye-opening experience for me. But then there's been lots of things in the line of duty where I've responded to something, you know, happening in the heat of the moment. Domestic assaults are probably one of the most dangerous things that we respond to. Let's say that I knock on a door and a couple, and trust me, domestic violence has no boundaries, socioeconomic, gender, sexual orientation, none of it. We see it all. So we respond to a domestic in progress. Household partners are fighting, whatever that relationship looks like. We separate, right? Law enforcement are trained. We need to separate the parties. We're not going to try to do an interview of both parties. Separate the parties. Inevitably, it seems that one officer and one party of the domestic assault end up in the kitchen talking to that person. Like, a lot of times an entryway into a house is in a kitchen. So it just seems like a logical place. That's the most dangerous place to talk to somebody, because what is the kitchen full of? Weapons, knives, you know, sharp objects. So domestic assaults are very, very dangerous.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question from the chat. This person would like to go into forensics for blood spatter. So what kind of work would I need to go into? Would it be a lab or more like the field work kind of work?
Okay, so I would say that your best bet would be, it's hard to specialize in just one thing. For example, blood spatter work, which is fascinating. So I would say you would probably want to start out, your goal should be becoming a crime scene investigator, getting the specialized training beyond crime scene investigation to become a blood spatter expert, right? And then what a lot of folks do is, after they've had a job like mine, either once they're retired or even sometimes they stop their law enforcement career and go off into a specialty, then they become consultants. And then you can actually do blood spatter analysis after the fact, based on the documentation that the crime scene investigators take. So for example, we have a specific method that we use to tape off a blood spatter pattern, and then we take extreme photographs and oftentimes even a digital scan, and then we can send that off to someone who specializes as a blood pattern blood spatter pattern specialist, and they can then do the analysis later. So I would say it would be hard to just do the analysis right out of the gate. I would say you're probably going to need to start as a crime scene investigator, get the specialized training, and then kind of focus on that track if that's what your real interest is in. I hope that made sense.
Sure. Here's another question. This person, it looks like they're interested in becoming a profiler. Would they want to take psychology and forensics classes? Are there other classes in college that would be better for becoming a profiler? And do you think in New England, would someone still have to go through the academy to become a profiler?
That's a great question. We really don't have profilers on the state level, at least in New England. When you hear about profilers, you typically think of the FBI and the Behavioral Analysis Unit. So that is a subject which typically it is a psychology-based profession. You need to get specialized in psychology, and then all of the behavioral pieces that go with that. There are places, I know right here in New England, Southern New Hampshire University has a forensic psychology degree. So forensic psychology is a really good track if that's what you're interested in specifically.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Here's another question. What was the best advice you can give on how to handle stressful situations or calls that you receive and go on?
That's a great question. Luckily, there has been a huge shift in the mental health of first responders in the past probably decade, I would say. It's really one of those things where we all kind of found our own way early on in my career, but there's been a big shift, and now folks are encouraged. For example, with teams that are exposed to higher risk things like crime scene team, our tactical team, we and our technology investigations unit that works with pornography and things like that, we are mandated, some of us once a year, some of us more than that, to meet with department clinicians, because I look at the stress of the job as cumulative stress, right? Day to day, I'm able to cope, but essentially think of it like sludge. It just builds and builds and builds, and eventually we all reach our breaking point. My personal threshold and what I always train at the academy, you go along and you do your thing day after day after day after day, and it might be the 10th type of call of this, let's say it's a fatal crash. Might be your 10th fatal crash you've been to, you've seen a lot of them, but something about this particular fatal crash tips the scale for you. You have to be really aware of your own threshold for that. So my personal threshold is if I go to a scene and it's bothering me, I expect that, right? Sometimes it bothers me, sometimes I'm okay. But day 2, day 3, if it's still spinning in my mind, that's my personal threshold to know that I need to reach out and get some help. I need to talk to somebody. And most times I found, for me, being fairly analytically minded, what causes me to spin with these cases and really bother me is when I can't make sense of what's happened. Usually I'm on the scene and I can process it, and I can, 1 + 2 = 3, and A, then B, then C. But it's when I can't make sense of that in my mind that I get stuck. So again, I think that it's a lot about finding what brings you joy. So for me, when I've had a rough day, I will go outside and I will sit with my chickens. My chickens bring me so much joy. They are so fun to watch. I'll go outside in the summer in my garden. I'll go for a hike. Like, it's really about that self-care. And it's very important to sort of keep a pulse on your own well-being, right? You don't want to wait until it gets to the point where those around you are saying something's really wrong. Like, you really have to get good with yourself and knowing what your own thresholds are, so you know when it's time to ask for help. And there's no shame in needing help. We're really pushing that these days. For years and years, this profession, you're just supposed to put up with it, right? It's just part of the job. You just do it, you just do it, you just do it. We have, a tragically high suicide rate in law enforcement, divorce rate, health issues. Lots of police officers die shortly after retirement because of the stress and that sludge that they've carried all these years and they've never dealt with. So it's really, the self-care is really, really important, whatever that looks like for the individual.
Thank you. If our high school doesn't have a sociology or a psychology class, is there another class that you would recommend for students to take?
Sure. I would say even if your high school doesn't offer it, you should look at CCV. Take an intro to psychology course or an intro to sociology course. You don't have to do it just through your high school. But anything, I think of civics as, obviously like the politics side of things, but some civics classes are also oriented just community-based, right? Community-based learning. And that you're going to sort of get a touch of sociology because you're looking at a community as a whole and how it operates and how it works. Again, I would say getting your hands on whatever you can, even if you do searches online and you find YouTube videos. Granted, you have to think about the source. Is it just some random person with no credentials, offering up a 30-minute talk on psychology, or is it, a professor of some sort or someone with some credentials? But, with the internet today, there's a lot of information out there, even to kind of do some self-learning. I'm working with a U32 student who's doing a self-study, and she's doing a lot of her own work on her interest that obviously the high school doesn't offer. So I would say most places it's a minimum of a bachelor's degree. For being a law enforcement officer, your military training can substitute that. We can or we do hire folks with just associate's degrees, but the field is becoming more and more and more and more competitive. When I went for my master's degree, I just got it actually just this year in the beginning of the year, but I've been working on it for a while. I was, at my age, I was in class with folks who are coming right out of college, going right into their master's degree. So I would say you should probably plan, Genevieve, on a 4-year degree and then trying to get your foot in the door in the field, getting some experience that way, and then maybe specializing from there or going on for your master's from there. Depends on if you want to be a law enforcement officer. If you want to get into law enforcement, then I would say you could do either a 2-year or a 4-year, get onto the department and then get into the crime scene work. But again, in Vermont, we only have one crime scene team, and that's mine. So that would be the Vermont State Police that you'd have to join to become part of that team. So depending on kind of where you settle, that may be different. But if you want to avoid doing the law enforcement route and you just want to get into the forensic science or the lab side of things or being a civilian, then I would say a 4-year degree.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Great. We've got another question here in the chat.
Okay.
I know that you haven't worked as a sheriff's deputy, but what do you know about any differences between deputy, police officer, trooper, etc., besides jurisdictional differences? Is there differences in the jobs?
Actually, I have been a deputy sheriff. When I worked for Montpelier, I worked part-time for the Washington County Sheriff's Department as well, just on the side, as an extra job. So I have. Okay, so this is gonna depend again on the area. So in Vermont, and I don't say this because I am one because I started as a local PD, but in the state of Vermont, there is a bit of a pecking order. I think there is one throughout the country, but in Vermont, the state police are looked at as the top agency in the state. I think that's because we are the biggest agency and we have the most resources, because we all go through the same police academy. We all put our uniform pants on the same way, one leg at a time. So Vermont State Police is no better, other than I think because we're a bigger agency and we have more resources. Secondly, I would say local law enforcement falls into the pecking order. Lastly, and again, I've done this, so I'm not picking on them, but sheriff's departments tend to fall on the bottom of the pecking order in Vermont, because most deputies in Vermont, most sheriff's departments deal with court transports right? So they're picking up prisoners at jail and bringing them to court and vice versa. They're serving civil paperwork, and they do some patrol, not to undermine them at all. Now, if you go down south, sheriffs are the top dogs. Like, that is where it's at. If you're going to be in law enforcement in certain states, you want to be a sheriff. Then it's local law enforcement, and then the troopers are on the bottom because they're thought of as like a highway patrol, and that's it. Because there are some state police agencies that literally their only jurisdiction is the highways, because their state is so populated that every town has its own police agency. Whereas in Vermont, it's kind of the opposite. You know, state police covers the majority of towns in the state of Vermont and the interstate. So we all go through the same exact training. The state police goes through a 3-week pre-basic, it's called. So for 3 weeks before everybody else goes to the academy, the troopers they go to a 3 weeks beforehand. Basically, it's learning all about the state police, the history of the state police. We have to do all of our personnel paperwork and all of that other agencies don't. So that 3 weeks is something that just the troopers do. Then all law enforcement goes through the same 16-week police academy. That includes game wardens, sheriffs, locals, state police. And then afterwards, there's a little bit more training that state troopers go through. But essentially, in the state of Vermont, it's a little different, only because of the size of the agencies. And again, geographically, depending on where you go, it's not the same. So, you know, all of us in the state of Vermont, we all have statewide jurisdiction. So when I worked for Montpelier Police, sometimes you might find me up on the Canadian border doing a click it or ticket detail. And people would say, what are you doing up here? You don't have jurisdiction up here. A law enforcement officer in the state of Vermont has jurisdiction through the entire state. I hope that helps.
It's a good bit of knowledge to know. Definitely. Here's another question. What kind of hours do you work, and how long does it typically take to solve a case?
Ooh, that's a great one. So currently I work Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. As a uniform trooper, if you work the day shift, you work at you start at either 7 or 8 a.m. and you work till either 4 or 5 o'clock at night as a day shifter. And then you work either 4 to 2 or 5 to 2 as a second shift officer. And we don't have 24-hour coverage in the state of Vermont. A lot of people don't realize that. We don't have troopers out after 2 or 3 a.m. We have troopers that are on call. So if there's an emergency, the trooper has to wake up, get dressed, and drive to the emergency. So it's a lot of people still don't realize that. So, and then it's a rotating schedule of days off. So once you get into the detective bureau, that's a Monday through Friday schedule, day shift, which is really nice after doing shift work for a long time. So how long does it take to solve a case? So it really depends. If I'm a uniform trooper and I'm responding to, or let's say I pull over a drunk driver, I'm immediately going to take them back to the barracks. I'm going to process them. That process of the whole DUI processing may take a couple of hours. And then I probably have 2 hours of paperwork, getting my affidavit and everything together, and that case is done. Then I might have a domestic assault that happens. Again, I might arrest somebody right away and have a few hours of paperwork. Then we have a homicide case. It could be a couple of weeks, but more realistically, it's a couple of months or a couple of years. Because they're not all cut and dry, you know, black and white type, you know, easy cases, if you will. Sometimes we go and we know right away who the suspect is, and we're just putting the puzzle pieces together to prove that it was the person we think it is. Then there's other times where it's a true whodunit and we just don't know. So that it's a big span.
Excellent. Well, just looking at the time, we've got a few more minutes to answer. We've got a lot of questions still in the chat, but we have a few more minutes to answer a couple more questions here. Okay. Here's a question I missed earlier. Is criminology a good major choice if I have an interest in behavioral profiling and crime scene investigation?
Yeah, criminology would be another good one, because that's going to be not just the criminal justice system, but sort of the study of crime. So that would be a really good one as well for if you like the whole profiling, behavioral analysis thing. Criminology would be another good one. Yep.
Have you ever had to work with the FBI to solve a case?
Yeah, actually, we have worked with the FBI. I mean, there's several, basically anytime there is a federal link or a federal nexus to a crime, we can request to partner up with a federal agency. It's not always the FBI, but Brooke Bennett, that was a very tragic homicide back in 2007. The FBI assisted us heavily with that case because we had perpetrators in Vermont and Texas, and it went across state lines. And their crime scene, the FBI evidence recovery team came out for that one. Israel Keys was a serial murderer throughout the US. We worked with the FBI because they killed a husband and wife in Essex, Vermont. The Couriers, Bill and Elaine Courier. We worked with the FBI extensively on that case. And again, with their evidence recovery team for weeks and weeks, we dug at the landfill in Coventry looking for their human remains. So yeah, we've worked with them a few times.
If we have time for one more. Say you were off duty in your jurisdiction and someone assaulted you. Would you place them under arrest yourself or subdue them and call 911?
That's a good question. It depends on, I would say it depends on the circumstances. If they attacked me, I would probably depend on whether or not I'm physically able to do something. But I've been in situations before where I've seen something off duty. And again, it depends. If I ever had my children with me, I would stand back and not let on that I was a police officer and be a really good witness. But if I didn't have my kids with me, I have stepped in before, identified myself as a law enforcement officer, and gotten the situation, you know, settled down until law enforcement got there. But if I were to be attacked, I guess it would depend on if physically I was able to. But I would definitely call for help for sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aimee.
Yeah, of
We
course.
really appreciate all this information you've given us.
Yeah, and if any of the instructors, I've worked with a few different schools, you know, want to have me come one-on-one to their students for some kind of a presentation on more of the crime scene investigation, I'm happy to do that. You know, reach out. I'm happy to. I love this. Outreach is a big part of what I do as well. So great.
Great. Thank you so much.